And I think it's a very important time, and this conference is fulfilling that important moment, to sit back and reflect on how is it working, how do we expect it and hope for it to work, and have we fallen into a structure that will actually make it hard to work?
CIGI has brought a lot to this subject over the years. This particular conference, in my view, is the best CIGI has held. There are a variety of reasons for that we can come back to. But what this conference brought was really an outstanding discussion of world-class experts on what the G20 looks like now, what are the challenges in front of the G20, both at the meeting that will take place in Toronto and the meeting that will take place in Korea. You know, there was a very interesting debate between those who put emphasis on the need for the G20 to show its accomplishments, to demonstrate that it was in fact following through on its commitments. Others felt that the G20 should be looking more out to the future, to the role the G20 can play on other issues other than the global financial and economic questions. So there's a really interesting discussion on those subjects.
I would say at this conference there was a quite stark, in some sense, divide between those who we would classify as optimists about the potential of the framework, the efficacy of the framework, and its beginnings, saying that this is a very, very important and useful process, that it has tests, but it can lead to very constructive and positive results. And those who think that we should be very, very much more cautious and indeed skeptical perhaps about what these kinds of processes can lead to, because the past has not been very successful. Indeed, as one speaker put it, by perhaps raising the profile to the leaders level, we may be undermining the leaders process, because the risks of not delivering in his view were quite high. But on balance, I would say that there were more perhaps optimists in the end, at least people who felt that it was worthwhile to continue to push on this and to give it as much traction as possible, while using this kind of a conference and this kind of a process as external scrutiny and additional mechanisms of accountability.
We've just come out of a very interesting conference here at CIGI. CIGI, as you know, is really was one of the spark plugs at the very beginning of the creation of the G20, and it's now at a position where it's got to continue. The G20 is now going from adolescence to maturity, and I think CIGI is taking it there, and certainly this conference would have reflected that. As an example, the financial crisis we've just gone through was one that had at its core a banking crisis of global reach, and we've got to make sure that countries with decimated balance sheets, as there are so many, Greece is only one example, aren't going to be facing further financial crises. And so one of the main discussions here was about a body called the Financial Stability Board, which is a new body based on an old one that really didn't totally work. And the creation of the Financial Stability Board is incredible in terms of its capacity, if in fact it functions properly, to deal with ongoing bank regulation, to make sure that countries in fact have the proper structures in place, and to prevent the kind of crisis you've just seen. Probably the best discussion that I have seen on the Financial Stability Board occurred here at CIGI.
The conference we had here over the last several days, I think, made some interesting contributions to that debate by focusing uniquely, I think, on the Financial Stability Board in Basel, Switzerland, which is a place where central bankers and regulators and finance ministers and ministries from the G20 countries and others meet to harmonize their approaches to this whole financial sector instability problem. And Eric Heliner here at CIGI has undertaken some research which is ongoing on the Financial Stability Board and how it differs from the Financial Stability Forum, which preceded it, which was narrower in its country composition and in its mandate. And I think that conversation that we had, Eric's paper, and the kind of discussion we had about that is really at the cutting edge of that particular issue. I don't know of any other outside scholar or institution that is actually pushing that issue forward. And everybody in the international community who's focused on this set of G20 summit issues needs to know something about how this FSB, Financial Stability Board, is actually moving forward or not, and what its challenges are. I think that what has happened since the founding of CIGI is that CIGI has evolved as a network itself, and has now a sort of portfolio of networks which brings together a diverse group of people depending on what the issues are that are being talked about. And that combined with its partners in this endeavor, CIGI's managed to have access to public officials, of course, here in Canada. We did in the last 2 days, and in other governments as well. We're working with the Koreans. We've had a consultation last year at this time with the UK officials preparing the G20 summit in London, in February, of last year, where we brought people together to discuss issues for the London summit. So there's been an important involvement of policy officials related to G20 summits, along with the expert communities that CIGI has drawn upon and represents itself. And what happens then is that the policy guys are focused on the day-to-day pressure of producing substance for the agenda and a process for their leaders and their ministers. We on the outside are able to see the substance and the process differently because we're not responsible for it. So I think what we've discovered is that there's a happy synergy or catalytic effect, as you suggest, that accrues to this whole process, whereby we are able to bring some perspectives to bear on it that officials simply aren't able to see because they have their nose in what's in the day-to-day. And they, in turn, are able to impart to us some of the realities of what the process will bear and what some of the ground truth realistic constraints are and what will happen. So it begins to sharpen our own vision about where the possible forward movement points are and where they're not. So I think it's been an extraordinarily productive combination of experts and officials, and from a diverse array of countries and professions and think tanks that CIGI has brought together, and that there is a substantial record now, I think, of influence on both the process elements of the G20 and also some of the substantive issues that it's actually moved on so far.
CIGI, since its inception, has focused very much on the challenges of global governance and how we can address global issues when we have national governments. And G20 as a forum which existed at the time CIGI was created as a finance ministers forum was seen as a potential forum to address some of the global issues. And so CIGI has devoted a lot of time. It really is a signature issue for us. And of course, with the economic crisis, G20 did transform itself into a meeting at leaders level, and a lot of the work which CIGI had done was useful background as governments wrestled with how to make the G20 a vital forum at leaders level.